another great program in our noontime lecture series at the State Capitol Museum. It's the 33rd program I've had the opportunity to organize since 2008. My thanks go to Susan Rohr, who's over in Moses Lake Ranch today, manager of the museum, for supporting this educational outreach, and to my family for the help with the programs. It's my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Karen Haas. She combines her passion for history and love of storytelling into bringing the past to life with living history presentations. Karen has researched and developed programs on a broad variety of topics, such as the American Revolution, Narcissa Whitman, the Oregon Trail, the fur trade of the Northwest, and Theo Foss. She was invited to delve into the extensive Abby Williams Hill collection at the archives of the University of Puget Sound to develop today's program. As an experienced teacher and museum curator of education, Karen is presently on the board of the Heritage League of Pierce County. She can often be found bringing the past to life at Northwest historic sites such as Fort Nisqually, Fort Steilacoom, and San Juan Islands National Park. Her living history presentations have been featured at Fort Clatsop, Whitman Mission National Historic Site, and the National Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. She feels especially rewarded telling the tales of those whose voices are usually silent in history, women, which is appropriate because this, I believe, is Women's History Month, March. Today, Karen will speak on a fascinating topic. No woman has ventured as far, the art and adventures of Abby Williams Hill. Now, I would normally say my honor to introduce Karen Haas, but she's going to come on as Abby Williams Hill, and the time is 1910. Thank you.
So here I am, back in Tacoma. Now, mind you, there is nothing wrong with Tacoma for a city, but I was not cut out for the cities. I was cut out for the wilds. But as long as my dear husband Frank is so ill and needs me to be here, Tacoma is my home. And I will make a home out of this fine apartment building that he struggled so and nearly ruined his health to build. And at least from here, I have a fine view of Wright Park, and I can look out at the trees there and think how far I have ventured. Now, of course, any venture needs a start. And mine started in Grinnell, Iowa, where I was born to one of the first families to travel westward with the town's founders. As you can see, venturing runs in my family. Now, Grinnell was a fine place to grow up. One can see everywhere that there is no drink to be had. It has a clean, moral, orderly outlook, and one can see by the houses and streets that the people there live on a higher moral plane than those in saloon towns. Now, as the Herald of Grinnell proudly states on their masthead, they are independent in everything, neutral in nothing. I, for one, have taken that motto to heart. Now, when I was 10 years old, I was thrown from a buggy, and that so injured my spine that I was in bed for months, scarcely able to walk until I was 17. I needed to do something to pass the time, and I began to draw, and discovered that I had an unsuspected talent for art. I'm sure no one would have thought I had any especial leanings in that direction had it not been for the accident. But afterwards, I received much support from my family, especially my dear Aunt Ruth, who's a botanist and skilled watercolor artist herself. I later studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, and while there, I roomed with a kind German family who taught me their language in return for me giving them music lessons. But that lasted for a few years, and then it was time for me to venture out of the Midwest, and I traveled to Berthier-en-Haut, some 15 miles north of Montreal, Canada. And there I taught drawing and painting at a girls' seminary, and I also became quite proficient in French. Ah oui, je parle français très bien, n'est-ce pas? Well, While I was there, I took advantage of the situation and I journeyed about whenever I could, painting everything I saw, the seacoast, the lakes, the mountains. Oh, as a child, I had long dreamed of seeing the mountains. I used to lay back when I was there in Grinnell, Iowa, and look up at the clouds and imagine them to be towering peaks. Oh, these eastern mountains thrilled my soul. Although little did I realize that they would appear almost minuscule in comparison with other grandeurs I would find in the West. Well, after 2 years at Berthier, I returned to Grinnell. I continued to paint, had several exhibitions, and taught painting and drawing from my parents' house. But that only lasted a year. I needed more education and new horizons. And so I joined the Art Students League in the city of New York, and there was privileged to study with the likes of William Merritt Chase. I still remember once when I overheard him saying, "Out of more than 100 students, there is not more than one who will ever become anything more than a mere decorative painter." Well, crestfallen, I told him that if this was the case, I had taken my last lesson. To which he said, "Oh, no, not you, Miss Williams. You can rise to the top if you wish. You have talent and a genius for work, and they go together." Well, I can assure you that encouraged me to work even harder. But not all was work in the city, for it was there that I met and married Dr. Frank Hill. Oh, it was his overflowing vitality and dapper air that first captured my eye. It was his kind and generous nature and willingness to venture westward that captured my heart. And so, we were married and soon traveling here to Tacoma, City of Destiny as they were calling it, and we arrived in 1889, the very year that this territory became Washington State. I had heard of the wonders of the Puget Sound, and what I found did not disappoint me. And the beauty all around gave solace to my soul. When the first year after we arrived here, our beloved son, Romain, was born partially paralyzed in his left side. I gave him all my care, and Frank gave him all of his medical skill, but it was 2 years before the boy was able to turn himself over in bed. It was 3 before he was able to walk unassisted. And so for 6 years, my life revolved around my son. I had little time for social obligations. Not that I regretted missing those. But I also had little time for my art, although I did steal whatever small bits of time I could in order to paint in a studio that I established in a house that I had moved to the beach there near Burton on Vashon Island. But I had no chance to go into the wilderness all around me that tantalized me so until the summer of 1895, I received an invitation to join an expedition climbing up to Mount Rainier. Well, of course, I leapt at the chance. Now, back then, camping was still new to me and oftentimes difficult. That first night, the wind came up, the tent flapped its wings, and lit on us sleepers twice. I christened our campsite the 4th night, Camp Misery. Hordes of mosquitoes attacked us as I struggled to sleep on a bed of stone that supported me rather like a starfish stranded on a rock at low tide. Oh, but nothing could quench my joy as we journeyed higher and higher, and on the 7th day, we reached paradise, and a more aptly named place I cannot imagine. Oh, from the moment we entered the park, the path was fringed with wildflowers in masses no florist could hope to attain. And there were waterfalls, fine beyond description, springing from rocks hundreds of feet up, breaking into spray through which, when the sun shone, could be seen beautiful rainbows. And above all, the mountain, it loomed grand and imposing and seemed so much larger than it ever did from down below. It was on that journey that I discovered that I truly was cut out for the wilds. Dressed in my knee-length skirt and leggings, I was soon at home camping. although I never could understand what it was that drove some people to risk their lives climbing clear to the top of the mountain. Me, I was content to stay in the campsite, sketching in the afternoon, seated on a precipice, about a foot wide and some several hundred feet up. Oh, how I yearned to paint all the beauties all around me. I thought how season upon season no human eye had seen the marvels all around, how the flowers had blossomed and faded, unseen, while down below, countless thousands were starving for beauty. Oh, I knew I was fortunate, and I relished each and every one of the 26 days of that expedition. And then, it was at 4:30 on the 13th day after I returned to Tacoma that some friends came by to say they were going out boating on Hood Canal and I could join them. Well, I whisked about, and by 9 o'clock that evening, I was standing on the commercial dock calling, "Gracie, ahoy!" Oh, that journey was only 12 days long, but it was filled with beautiful sunrises, the grandeur of the snow-capped Olympics, wildest beauty contrasting with calm, clear pools. And one day, after an exceptionally long tramp, all declared that no woman had ventured as far as I had. Well, it was thanks to an inheritance from my grandmother that I was able to join Frank when he journeyed to Hamburg, Germany to further his medical studies. We left just 2 days after I returned from Hood Canal. We stopped first in Ohio to visit with Frank's family, and Romaine stayed there while Frank and I journeyed on. And as we sailed out of New York Harbor, I remarked to my husband that Tacoma was far more imposing. Why, with our mountain, we had no need of a statue to adorn our harbor. Well, it was there in Europe I was enthralled to see the actual paintings and their colors that I had seen but copies of. And after Frank was done with his medical studies, the two of us would get on our tandem bicycle and wheel about. Oh, it seems that tandems were rather a rarity in Germany. Many of the time, children would run after us calling, "2 on 1! 2 on 1!" Oh, I was much impressed with the German and their sense of cleanliness. I was not so impressed with their constant preparation for warfare. And I could not understand why they held their Kaiser with all of his ostentatious pomp in such high esteem, while higher than Herr Froebel, who had dedicated his life to make children happy with his kindergartens. While Frank was studying, I did some studying of my own. Among them was increasing my proficiency in the German language. And once my German professor informed me that women are somewhat lower than men, Mrs. Hill. We should not allow them to become highly educated, otherwise they would not want to do housework and would become dissatisfied. It was all I could do to bite my tongue at that moment. Well, after wheeling about France and then Italy as well for almost 2 years, it was good to return to the United States. Frank immediately came back here to Tacoma to open up his practice and our apartment in the fine new Chamber of Commerce building. Romaine and I returned in a much more leisurely manner, stopping to visit my family in Iowa along the way. Now, Romaine was almost 9 years old at this point. Oh, he's always been such a clever boy. But with his paralysis, he was unable to attend regular school. I was not able to have any more children myself, and knowing what miserable lives so many motherless children lead, I determined upon adoption. And so, in 1898, Frank and I adopted 9-year-old Eulalie. The following year, I adopted 10-year-old Ione. And not long after that, Eulalie's older sister, Ina, came to live with us, although I have not been able to adopt her yet. Now, at this point, as you know, I had determined that I was not cut out for city life, and I came up with a fabulous plan. I would establish a summer camp for the children and I on the south end of Vashon Island, and oh, the preparations we made. We must have town clothes, and we must have an outfit for sketching, and we must have an outfit for insects, and we must have a botany outfit, and we must have articles for preserving specimens, and well, when all of these musts were piled onto the beach, along with provisions and books and bags, well, there was no one who could deny our party's right to the name of Hill. Our delightful campsite was quite simple. We cooked on a sheet of iron that was laid over a 12-inch hole for the fire. There were specially designed bags with pockets in the front and a slit in the back for kitchenware outside, and similar bags inside the tent for each camper's clothing. There was a wooden box nailed to the tree for a cupboard, and a table underneath that very tree with a white oilcloth cover. All in all, we were quite orderly. I insisted that the children continue with their studying. They needed to read each day. They wrote in their journals every day, and we studied together German, French, music, and art. Of course, botany and biology lessons teemed around us, and rowing and hiking provided exercise for all and was especially beneficial for Romaine. Now, dear Frank would come and visit us on weekends whenever he was able, and the dear man, he was usually dressed in his tie and suit, as he was always so ever dapper, and I fear he usually appeared just as out of place as I frequently appeared out of place among the overdressed women of the city. I have always preferred simply made, practical clothing. Now, early on in our marriage, Frank once suggested that perhaps I should consider wearing the more fashionable clothing, which back then meant the even more restrictive corsets than nowadays, and the voluminous petticoats and the bustles. Now, I have avoided wearing such things ever since attending a lecture some years ago, which reinforced my belief that such atrocities were harmful to the body. And so, I told my husband that I would be happy to wear such attire if he would try wearing them for a day and could still recommend them. Well, he did try it, and I can assure you he's never even hinted that I wear such things ever since. Well, it was in 1901 that Frank wanted to attend a medical convention in Chicago and do some more studying in New York. And we decided that we would combine this with a visit to our family and also taking Romaine to see a specialist in Philadelphia. Now, I have always believed that travel broadens the mind, and I determined to bring my eldest, Ione, along with us. Alas, I was not able to bring Eulalie and Ina with us, although I wrote many letters back to our little birds who were separated from the flock. Well, neither Romaine nor Ione realized how much work an educative tour meant. I insisted that they write in their journal about each and everything that they experienced, and I made sure they experienced quite a lot. We combined visits to such usual tourist spots as museums and aquariums and concerts with such illuminating places as Miss Jane Addams' Hull House establishment in Chicago and Perkins School for the Blind and a number of different factories. And oh, how we marveled at the wonders of modern technology, although I did grieve to see what difficult lives so many people must lead to provide the world with their goods. We had planned to be gone about 3 months, but then Romaine fell terribly ill. Frank believed that a warmer climate would be of benefit to the child, and so, while Frank returned here to Tacoma for his practice, the children and I ventured southward. And the further south we went, the more and more horrified I was at the ever-increasing prejudice and such evidence all around me. Oh, but I was much impressed with the Tuskegee Institute. Oh, a more intelligent-looking group of teachers one could not find. Oh, and the students. Oh, when 1,200 of them marched past me, I thrilled to think of them marching out of slavery and into freedom. And I can still hear the words, the stirring words that were spoken at a conference that was held while we were there. Among them, the only limit to education is ability, and ignorance is the mother of all prejudice. Indeed. Well, I met Mrs. Margaret Washington. Oh, she was a true lady, and I was very interested in her mother's meetings. And her husband, Dr. Booker T. Washington, oh, he's one of the most truly great men of our time, and his unswerving dedication to humanity and his great spiritual strength impressed me so that when I had the chance to name a mountain in Washington State, I knew I had no alternative. I christened it Mount Booker. There were some who felt it a travesty to name a white snow-capped peak over a black man, but I knew better. Well, the children and I journeyed on. I was not impressed with New Orleans and its dirt and odors, vice and alcohol. And so the children and I opted to go to the charming coastal village of Bay Saint Louis. And we spent 5 delightful weeks there, tramping about, gathering armloads of flowers, and relaxing in clear sunlit days and starlit nights. And Romain grew better by the day. And so that spring, he was healthy enough for us to continue our journey on. We were so happy to get to Grand Canyon and be camping once again, although not everyone was so pleased. One person, when it was so cold, misunderstood and thought that someone's clothing had frozen stiff on their body while they slept. And they said, imagine having to camp and sleep in a place where such a thing could happen. To which all I could think was, imagine being so civilized, such a thing would not be fun. Well, the scenery there at the Grand Canyon was spectacular. Oh, there were great cacti and wildflowers in profusion everywhere, and there were brilliantly colored rocks that looked as if great castles had tumbled into ruin there. I did try riding the donkey down to the bottom of the canyon, and the children stayed up above, calling encouragement to me. I was quite nervous at first, but the beauty all around me calmed me. Well, we journeyed on, and there in Los Angeles, we were overjoyed to be reunited with Eulalie and Ina, and I came up with a fabulous idea. The children had not experienced the mountains firsthand, and so we joined a horseback trip up to Kings Canyon and Sequoia Park. Oh, the scenery was stunning, and those ancient trees, what thoughts they bring to mind. Why, what is 100 years to them? Well, do you realize that Moses himself could have seen the tree that we now call the General Grant had he come to the forest during his lifetime? Oh, and the lighting there, it was sublime, especially in the evenings when the valley would be in deep shadow and the sun would gild the peaks, the rounded domes up above. Oh, I reveled in the beauty all around me, and the children enjoyed camping and tramping about. And as we took the train further north, I thought longingly of Frank, and I thought how there was a green hill far away. But I was not ready to return to civilization yet, and we camped the rest of that summer at Trout Lake, just north of the Columbia River. Oh, everything was delightful about that campsite, except the rattlesnakes. I have never before delighted in women's foolish fads of fashion, but the latest trend for wearing rattlesnake belts, I find delightful. I applaud it at every occasion, and I should wish that all women would not rest until they had a collection in as great a variety as they can possibly procure. Then somebody informed me that people were figuring out how to cure rheumatism with rattlesnake oil, and I wrote to Frank suggesting we should be harvesting them. He could effect wonderful cures, and we would soon be rich. Oh, the sooner the world is rid of those vermin, the better. Well, as we camped, I, of course, insisted that my children continue to combine education with exploration. And while we were there were some college professors who camped right next to us, and they exclaimed over the enthusiasm with which my children read about that which they had experienced. And these educators said how different that was about students who had to read about something because they had to give a speech on it. They said that they feared most parents would not be able to adopt my methods, but there was no doubt as to their efficiency. Well, the beauty all around me that spring and summer filled me with such enthusiasm that I was inspired to do much painting, and that proved to be fortuitous. For that winter, when I was back in Tacoma, I thought back on how much healthier Romaine had been in the summer in the mountains rather than at sea level, and how all the children thrived in the wilderness, and I came up with the bright idea of painting for the railroads. And so, that winter, I gathered together all my new paintings, and I went up to a meeting of the executives of the Great Northern Railroad in Seattle, and I gave them a proposition that they pay me not in money, but in travel vouchers, 1,000 miles for me and each one of my children. They quibbled about the children, but I insisted. And I also said that after they were done exhibiting my paintings at the St. Louis World's Fair, well, the paintings would be returned to me. They were eager to have paintings to promote tourism and settling in the West along their lines, and to my great joy, they accepted my proposition. Oh, that summer between May and October, the children and I made 5 camping trips into the wilderness. It was a whirlwind summer of traveling by train and horseback and on foot. Among my many memories of that summer, of the time the snake came up to me while a landslide came crashing down behind me and a group of Indians came riding up. The winds blew, snow fell, rain dripped, and sun shone. Often I searched long and hard for just the right vista, with just the right light. Now, mind you, I did not merely sketch in the wilds and paint at leisure in my studio. Oh, no. I painted every brushstroke on the spot. But it was worth it. It was worth it. My proudest moment came when a group of miners looked at my work and said, "That's the real thing there, boys. Ain't no need to go to the canyon if one can see that." Well, all in all that summer, I finished 22 paintings, 20 of which were selected to be included in this booklet, Scenic Washington Along the Line of the Great Northern Railway. All the pictures are mine. The text is not. For example, take the description of Mount Booker near Lake Chelan. The view, as expressed by a tourist, adequately pictures the grandeur of this region. Each moment, we were more and more enraptured of the scene, each moment more helpless to express the deep emotion of our hearts. Overcome, nonplussed, helpless, in our dire extremity to formulate words to express depth of feeling, we were plunged into hopeless despair and could only ejaculate, "Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful." And my children say my prose sometimes gets a bit too florid. Well, these 20 paintings, and also my painting of the rhododendron, which I'm sure you know is the Washington State flower, were selected to represent Washington State at the World's Fair in St. Louis. But before they were shipped out, they were exhibited here in Tacoma, and that too proved to be fortuitous. For executives of the Northern Pacific Railroad came to the exhibition, and they wanted paintings to promote their lines at the Lewis and Clark Exposition in Portland in 1805. They gave me the same offer of painting for travel vouchers, and this time for only 10 paintings of the Monte Cristo Mountains on the west side of the Cascades, Mount Rainier, and Idaho. Only 10 paintings? It sounded so much easier. It sounded so much easier. Oh, my memories of that summer are clouded by the smoke which blanketed the region from the many forest fires which raged out of control that summer. But Not all was bad, for you see, when it was cloudy, the children and I would enjoy tramping about, and when the sun shone, well, then I would paint, usually with one of my children seated by my side, reading aloud to me, while the other children would enjoy exploring nature, doing things like sliding down the snowfields near Lake Eunice. And oh, my confidence grew by the day. I had fewer times that I worried if my painting was any good at all. Although we did have our frustrations. Chief among them was arriving at a train station and realizing that our luggage did not arrive at the same time or on the same train. I can only hope that the day will soon come when such frustrations with luggage are a thing of the past. Well, by November, I had finished those 10 paintings, delivered them to the Northern Pacific. The children and I had made it to St. Louis to see the end of the World's Fair, and we had journeyed on to Washington, D.C., where the children could drink in more culture and learning, and I could study at the Corcoran galleries. Now, while we were at our nation's capital, there was a meeting of the International Congress of Mothers. I attended a session, and while I was there, I noticed who was sitting up on stage but one of my childhood friends, Mary Grinnell. Well, I was immediately invited up to the platform, introduced all around, and by the end of that session, I was selected to be the founder of the Washington State chapter of that worthy organization. Among its lofty goals are to raise the standards of home life and to surround the childhood of the entire world with that good, wise, loving care which raises good citizens. I was once told that the proper field for a woman is at the hearth of the home. Well, I believe that the definition of hearth needs to be expanded to include wherever children are present. When we were in Washington, I received an offer for another commission from the Northern Pacific, this time to paint in Yellowstone National Park. Oh, I could not turn down this offer. I so hoped Frank could join with us, but he could not get away from his practice. I tried to write to explain Yellowstone to him, but I felt hopeless. Everything there was so strange and wild, it felt as if we were on another planet. Oh, spouts of steam would erupt from unexpected places with horrible groanings, sputterings, and sighs. Oh, there were paint pots, which were actually boiling mud, but it looked for all the world like great cauldrons of pink, yellow, white, brown, and gray mush plopping away. And oh, geysers would shoot beautiful jets of water in the air, which glistened and gleamed like strings of diamonds. Oh, there is nothing like Yellowstone. One must experience it for oneself. Well, from our peaceful camp in the pines, the children and I enjoyed tramping about and experiencing the beauties and mysteries of nature in Yellowstone. We would boil our eggs in the geyser pool, and we enjoyed soaking our toes in the warm water. And oh, wildlife just teemed in the park. There were eagles, squirrels, deer, and bear. Oh, each evening we very much enjoyed going to watch the bear there at the dump near Old Faithful. And each afternoon our campsite would be visited by 2 silvertips that we christened the Heavenly Twins. And we discovered that a well-placed plate of sugar would distract the bears from eating that which one did not want them to be eating. Oh, all in all, we found the bears to be quite charming. Far more so than the often irritating, pestering tourists. Although I did sometimes feel sorry for them. Oh, most of them hastened through at such a speed, never off the beaten path, with never a chance to see anything except that which was outlined for them, and as such, they missed so many splendors all around them. During our month at Yellowstone, I completed 3 paintings, 2 of the falls and 1 of the canyon. And often I was seated at precarious places with winds that threatened to bedevil me and carry me away. Once, when I was painting, such a strong twister struck that it wrenched the picture that I was painting away from its fastenings and down the canyon. Oh, I feared that all that work was lost. But a gallant guide risked his life. He climbed down with one end of a rope tied around his waist while his friends held the other end. And he retrieved the painting, and as he was handing it to me, his young son looked up and said, "I bet you're glad to get that picture back. It would have been an awful waste to paint, wouldn't it?" Well, as we returned home, we stopped to visit the Flathead Reservation. Oh, I very much wanted to paint the Indians in their picturesque costumes. Oh, and despite the language barrier, we made many wonderful friends. Dr. Heidelberg and his wife, he was the agency physician, were of great help, but it was dear Tatankaska, White Bull, visiting chief of the Sioux, that truly opened doors for me. Oh, such a brilliant man. He soon learned more of my language than I ever learned of his. He pronounced my name Appy. And when he was not pleased, he would say, "No, saw, Appy." I heard that phrase rather a lot as I attempted to paint his portrait. But finally, at least I was pleased with the results. We would go riding together frequently as he introduced me to Indians that he thought I would want to paint. And he took the children and I to several powwows, and he took me to a war dance once. And oh, the people there were garbed just in beautiful clothes, many of them covered with elaborate beadwork and wearing expensive feather headdresses. Although more than a few of them were somewhat minus coverings for the lower limbs. Something which perhaps is not any more savage than the custom among white women to go to dances with the upper part of their body uncovered. The more we get to know the Indian and see life from their viewpoint and see so much in them to respect and love, the more we realize how much we have lost by not, in the first case, becoming to them such good and true friends as they could trust and depend on. We seek to civilize the Indian by cutting their hair and putting our form of clothes on them. And we are astonished that they do not find short hair and trousers infinitely better than blankets and a braid. They are children of nature and have much to teach us. It was with regret that we left the reservation. And as we parted, dear White Bull told us that his friendship would last as long as the sun rose and set until he took his last breath, and that he would give a hand or even a finger for me if necessary, and that his heart would be heavy for many and many a moons at our parting. Such was the friendship of White Bull, chief of the Sioux. As we returned home, I gave several speeches promoting the International Congress of Mothers. And that August, the first meeting of the Washington State chapter of the Congress was held here in Tacoma at the Baptist Church. It was very well attended, and I was selected to be the first president. Well, around about that time, I received an offer for another commission from the Northern Pacific Railroad to return to Yellowstone, this time focusing on the Upper Geyser region. Oh, this trip started out so much better because Frank was able to join us. And he was able to meet our friends at the reservation, and he spent 8 days touring about the park. After he left, the weather was most of the time terrible. My health, it was frequently not good, and all too often where I had to paint was altogether too close to the main tourist paths. But through it all, the glory of Yellowstone shone through, and the colors of the Upper Geyser Basin. Oh, I feared people would not believe that the colors I painted could possibly be true. We returned home through the reservation, and though I believe I reached the pinnacle of my painting with these portraits, there was also much sadness. For you see, completely against the treaty, white men were coming on to the reservation. They were cheating the Indians out of their land, and they were spreading discord and alcohol. The lives of these people would never never be the same again. As for me, I received offers of commission from the Canadian Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroad, and as honored as I was by them, I had to turn them down because, you see, now it was time, finally, for a long-delayed journey to Europe with my children. Now, the original plan was to bring all the children with me, but later it was changed and we all agreed that Ione would remain at home. This was a difficult decision, but it was one for her benefit. She was now of age to attend college, and so we enrolled her in the McMinnville College down in Oregon. And she had also started to show a completely unwarranted jealousy towards her siblings. Well, I discovered that I was justified in my decision, for no sooner had I left the country that she withdrew herself from McMinnville College and enrolled herself in the nursing school up at Good Samaritan Hospital in Portland, something which Frank had especially prohibited until she was 25 years of age, because he knew all too well the temptations to which young nursing students are submitted. And she also has shown herself to be quite a spendthrift with her clothes, even turning to her former guardian for... The less said about that, the better. Well, so I focused on my work with the International Congress of Mothers, and I feverishly sewed to finish a wardrobe for myself and my children. And that October, Romaine, Eulalie, and Ina, and the girls' brothers, Clifford, and I started our journey. We first stopped at Lake McDonald in Montana, and then we visited with family in Iowa and Ohio. And through this time, I started receiving some very concerning letters from Frank. They were talking about things like bank foreclosures and such. Now, I have never had much to do with finances. Frank always took care of such things with the family. I received my inheritance and gave it to Frank. He deposited in the bank, and when I needed money, he would write me a check. Well, but with these letters, I started considering possibly canceling our European tour, but knowing that I could practice rigid economy while traveling, we went forth with our plans. And so, that March, I gave a speech to the International Congress of Mothers in Philadelphia, and then the children and I set sail. I was still a bit concerned about Romaine's health, but a visit with a specialist, Lord Horsley, in London, eased my fears. He prescribed a regimen of strenuous exercise. And so we had a bicycle made with a specially designed handlebar and pedal just for Romaine, and the children and I pedaled merrily about England and then the continent. But then that next spring, first Ina and then Eulalie contracted typhoid fever. Eulalie recovered first, but Ina remained dreadfully ill for a long time. I stayed by her bedside for weeks, fearing the worst. But finally she recovered, although she was unable to travel for some 9 months. And through all this time, I continued to receive concerning letters from Frank, and I wrote home telling him to take care of himself and to not worry about finances and not worry about that apartment that he was spending so much time building, and to go home and get a good night's sleep rather than sleeping at his office. I thought things were better. But I received notification that fall that Frank's health had been failing for some time, but he did not want me informed because I was so tied up with Ina. Well, at this news, I whisked about and we returned home as quickly as humanly possible. And there the nurse told us that she had feared that Frank would not live until we returned. His nerves had become unstrung, and it had affected his heart. He'd had a complete and total breakdown and was unable to speak for weeks at a time. And the doctor prescribed that he be completely free from all worries and cares, and so I sent the children towards the east for schooling, and I rented a cabin for Frank and I there at Glen Cove on Henderson Bay. I returned to Tacoma as was necessary to close down his practice and to oversee the completion of the Hillcrest apartments that he had all but destroyed his health trying to build. Oh, but this spring, Frank seems to be so much better, and so we have returned to Tacoma, and we are living here in the Hillcrest. Now, of course, my concern is mainly with Frank, as it should be, but If his health continues to improve, well, I still have my dreams. I want to work more with the International Congress of Mothers. I believe we should be teaching parents and teachers to teach the children about sex hygiene. Ignorance is not innocence. I am concerned about the ever-increasing numbers of people and automobiles coming into our national parks and the effects that this will have on the wilderness. I want to have something to say about that. And of course, there are always new vistas to see and new places to explore, for as you now know, I am a woman who likes to venture far. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.